I think fundamentally this afternoon we are here to debate not scrapping or getting rid of this scheme. What we're debating is how we make this scheme work, and that is the fundamental importance here. Because ultimately, if we look at what we are trying to do here, it is about making sure that we have a genuinely circular supply chain for food and drink, making sure that we don't have a supply chain that relies on containers that ultimately linearly end up in waste, but ultimately end up back in reuse, whether that's through recycling. But ultimately, I think we need to have a system that requires reuse. But the reality is that we are heading for a mess, and we do need urgent action to simplify and clarify, because otherwise the impact on business will be intolerable. Because quite frankly, we are in a moment, we are 6 months away. And no business can tolerate uncertainty about how it manages its goods and products in less than 6 months. No business can cope with not knowing what it should be investing in 6 months away. Perhaps the very big businesses can, but the smallest ones cannot. And that's why we need our engine. I think Christine Graham was first.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Daniel Johnson. On uncertainty for businesses, I've already raised my concerns about craft brewers earlier at Traquair. But Dryden Aqua, an existing successful glass recycling company in my constituency, recycles glass into eco-friendly water filtration systems. But according to Circularity Scotland's rules, their business is not a recycling business. Does the member agree with me? This is yet another example, and nobody has mentioned existing recycling businesses yet, that this is the reason why this scheme must be paused with regard particularly to glass.
Daniel Johnson.
I think she raises another excellent example of why we've got real confusion 6 months out from launch. And I don't want to see this scheme paused, but unless there's very urgent action, this scheme is headed for disaster, because ultimately we have a lot of confusion. And I have a lot of sympathy for the Minister. I think she's tried to do a great deal in a short space of time. But ultimately, we do have confusion right now. And while she spent most of her time trying to explain the justification system, that's not where we are. What people need to know is how this will work. And frankly, I would say gently to CoCab Stewart and James Dornan, it's very unhelpful people reminiscing about return schemes when this is not what this scheme will do. Because ultimately we need a just transition. But the only way we'll deliver a just transition is if we have a scheme that is robust and understood by those that need to operate it. And I think that's why Fiona Hislop was absolutely right to say that ultimately what we need is clarity for small businesses. Because as also Claire Baker and Annie Wells were pointing out, they have idiosyncrasies about what they supply, whether it's boutique retailers supplying niche products that they themselves are importing, or small businesses that will not be able to either afford nor physically install DRS. Because as a retailer, I wouldn't want to be handling broken glass on my premises, and yet we don't really have an answer. We don't have a practical blueprint for small retailers, and these are the sorts of things which may well be coming, and I would be grateful, but we ultimately, for whatever reason, small businesses do not have those details now when they need them. And I think Liam MacArthur is also absolutely right. Well, it's very welcome to see this additional £22 million. The problem is the complexity. And while that might be an upfront cushion, ultimately what many businesses are saying to me is that it's the time that will take for these monies to come back to them that's just simply too long. If the money that comes back to them is longer than the terms that they have for their customers and suppliers, they will be out of pocket permanently. No small business can afford that sort of level of impact to their cash flow. So I am very grateful, and I'm pleased that Lorna Slater is having meetings, but ultimately what she needs to do is get to grip with this. And while many of these issues are ultimately the issues and responsibility of Circularity Scotland, it's her policy, and she needs to get to grips with them, because I think ultimately, as Brian Whittle pointed out, I think they're the roadblock, because they're in a monopoly position and they're the ones that are impeding the successful implementation of her policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.